The upcoming presidential election keeps taking surprising and unsettling turns. One constant, though, the Biden administration doesn't seem to be holding back on an ambitious agenda for regulation, which means contractors could see a slew of new and interim regulations coming as soon as the next few months. Here with his take on all of this, federal sales and marketing consultant Larry Allen. And you've looked at the latest rollout of the regulatory agenda, and if you're a contractor, you got to pay attention.
Tom, you really do have to pay attention. And this regulatory agenda, which only came out within the last few weeks, didn't really get a lot of attention. And yet it's pages and pages of proposed rules. Now, of course, all of those don't impact government contracting, but a number of them do. The list of proposed defense federal acquisition regulations in and of itself is pages long. And it can catch up any type of company that's doing business with the Department of Defense, not just those who are paying attention to DoD rules.
Right. A lot of it has to do with the origin supply chain issues vis-a-vis China.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole big discussion about Chinese supply chains. And look, we're all in favor of secure supply chains, Tom. Everybody wants to make sure that we keep national security at the top of the list. But one of the problems that we're starting to see already is that the pendulum never really stops in the middle. And you're starting to see and hear some anecdotal evidence about contracting officers really taking umbrage with anybody that has even the most tangential relationships with China. And while we don't want Chinese-made things in critical infrastructure, we do have to understand that China makes a substantial amount of the world's goods. And if we want to operate, then we're going to have to find some medium between using those where we need to and keeping those solutions out of sensitive operations.
I remember a few months back the GSA got dinged because it bought conference room cameras by a manufacturer called Owl, which are made in China. And a conference room camera, confidential things get discussed in GSA conference rooms, maybe not so much for national security as in, say, Pentagon conference rooms. But I guess the worry is, are these cameras somehow sending back what they're seeing and hearing to China, that type of thing?
Well, right. And that's a legitimate concern to have. And look, the bottom line is GSA expects contractors to abide by Trade Agreements Act rules and regulations, and if contractors have to do that, then GSA should as well. And that case that you mentioned, Tom, I think has really helped create kind of an atmosphere of fear inside the General Services Administration over Chinese-made goods, to the point where I'm starting to wonder if you can have General Tso's chicken for lunch and still end up being a valid U.S. supplier.
Yeah, well, it is hard to get by China. I mean, I was looking at webcams for my home use, and, Logitech, I don't know, I presume they're made in China, but there's some very innovative cameras out there. And, one of them, it's on the stalk so that it ends up in the middle of your screen, so you're looking right into someone's eyes, as opposed to the cameras which are above or to the side, and nobody's ever looking at each other on meetings. All right, seems like a good idea. But it said you could download 2 spec sheets, one in English and one in Mandarin. I thought, well, okay, we know where this is made.
Right, right.
I'm not sure I'd want that in my house.
No, as I said, we really do have to make sure we're protecting national security. And there are legitimate concerns with some Chinese-made goods that you have to pay attention to. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's going to be some times when you have to do that. You just need to be able to manage the risk appropriately until such time as either the U.S. or its allies ramp up their own domestic production and present alternatives that are both effective and within the reasonable cost realm. We've seen this started to happen, Tom, with Section 889 that I know we've talked about before. This is the telecommunications ban across all of government. And what's in the news right now? Well, for something like the 5th year in a row, the Department of Defense has come out and asked Congress for a waiver from Section 889. And it's not because the Department of Defense doesn't want to have secure supply chains. It's the realization that in certain parts of the world, there are no alternatives to Huawei uh, servers. And, that's why DoD has said, look, we can't realistically leverage a U.S. law to get all of our allies to dump servers that they use and are fully integrated into their systems when there are no ready-made alternatives that they can turn to. And that's just another example of where you need to mitigate the risk and manage it and understand that this is the world that we live in. And, the same thing should be true for contractors, Tom. I think that, if DoD has problems with 889 compliance and they're asking for a break, maybe we should give a similar break to industry.
We're speaking with Larry Allen, president of Allen Federal Business Partners. That's the other side of this. Even though things like student loans, are forgiven, or the administration tries to, they get rebuffed by the courts here and there. And also health care cost burdens. They're looking for relief there for people, but contractors never get a break.
No, contractors don't get a break, Tom. And while it may seem like no one is held accountable for their actions these days, contractors most definitely are. So while other people may be looking at certain types of monetary forgiveness, I am counseling contractors not to do that. Contractors have to make sure that they are up to date on their compliance processes, understand what they're signing up to when they sign not just that contract, but a modification to that contract, because sometimes those modifications can undo things that you originally agreed to. And it's not like if you say, please give me forgiveness, that you're going to be treated the same as people with student loans or medical debt.
And that leads to the question of companies, small companies in particular, entering the federal market and whether they want to, given the regulatory and compliance costs and burdens, and just trying to understand it all, can be hard for a new company. And you're also pointing out this week that there is some technical issues with respect to simply registering with the SAM system operated by GSA on behalf of the government. It's not so easy to get your unique identity ID. So what do you see going on there?
Tom, this is something that I've experienced myself and some of my clients have experienced recently as well. And that is, when you're registering on SAM, you have to understand the difference between getting a unique identifier and full SAM registration. And you also have to understand that while the Federal Service Desk and the SAM site may look the same and offer to the same types of solutions, they are two, in fact, different websites. And I think where a lot of companies get frustrated is they try to execute something on sam.gov when they're technically on the FSD site and they can't do it and they can't figure out why. Well, this is my recommendation to contractors, whether you're new or whether you're experienced, and that is, even when it comes to SAM registration, read the fine print. There are a lot of good help desk articles that GSA has put out, but you can't just scan through this in a second and think that you got it, because that will lead to substantial frustration. So like anything else, while it may be a little confusing because there are several different sites and more than a couple of acronyms to understand just to get started in government business, to get started in that business, you have to make sure that you're paying attention to the details just as you would after you get a contract.
And SAM, System for Award Management, I think is what that stands for, was originally set up as a way to streamline and simplify contractors getting their names into the system so federal contracting officers could find them. But it has worked out to be just ever more complicated, hasn't it?
They've had a series of challenges, Tom, when GSA transitioned away from DUNS numbers to unique entity identifiers. That was supposed to be straightforward, and of course nothing is really ever straightforward in government contracting, and that caught up companies of all sizes. And one of the most unfortunate outcomes was that it really delayed payment to small businesses that are dependent on cash flow. And I think it took a while for GSA to work through those problems, and most of them now have been addressed. But that only works if you've been in the system for a while. If you're still coming in new to it, then you need to understand that the barrier even to sam.gov registration is maybe a little bit higher than you think it is, and that when you're registering in SAM, you are taking the first step towards saying my company will comply with